Hi, everyone. Sarah McElroy from Raise to Rise here, and I am coming to you today with another story from the Great Resignation. We are talking all things career agility with Jen Chang. Jen is a consultant providing strategic planning and coaching services. She has worked with a variety of organizations, from small nonprofits and startups to large private healthcare systems, working with these organizations to design, implement, and optimize software projects. After taking a bit of time off, Jen is returning to digital strategy to focus on social impact organizations. Now, Jen is the epitome of career agility, having been a lawyer, a chief product officer, and now running her own digital strategy consultancy. So we are so excited for the conversation ahead of us today. Jen, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks so much. It's so nice to be here and to chat with you.
So, Jen, we're excited to have you here today, not only to talk about your experience with the Great Resignation, but to talk more broadly about your career trajectory and what's brought you to digital strategy here today. So, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit of your story, would love to start there.
Yeah, I find the Great Resignation really interesting because it seems like something that's actually very familiar to me, but kind of a new phenomenon for a lot of people. So it's been really interesting following other people's stories. Um, my path is sort of like a long and circuitous one. I started off, going to college and thinking that I was going to become an academic. And so I got a job working at a think tank in Washington, D.C. And then during that time, I kind of realized that what I wanted from my life wasn't exactly what becoming an academic would require. So I made a transition, decided to go to law school, and I became a lawyer for several years. And I actually really enjoyed being a lawyer. I loved the people I worked with. I was fortunate to get a job at a good firm. I felt like I was learning a lot all the time, but it really did not feel like what I wanted to do with my life long term. So one of the hardest decisions of my professional life, and my life in general, honestly, was to make the decision to leave the practice of law. And then after doing that, I went and got a degree in information science and was helping a small nonprofit build a digital library. And the interesting thing was that this was a nonprofit that really focused on land rights, so property law, actually. It was just property law in the developing world. So it felt like I had this interesting thread that connected my prior life to my new life. But while I was working on that project, after a couple of years, I felt like what I really enjoyed was building the software, being part of a team to create something. And that's how I ended up kind of being in technology more consciously. And so I've been working in technology for 8 years now. And I did it mostly as a consultant, but I really had most of my work through one software agency and also some of the nonprofits I worked with. So I was actually able to turn some of my employers into my clients over time. Yeah. And so then during the pandemic, I had a long-term contract, a couple of them actually, and I felt like I had once again sort of followed my path to kind of its logical endpoint and still wasn't quite satisfied with where that trajectory was going. And so I felt like, you know what, now might be a time to make another pivot. But rather than feeling the need to know exactly where I was going next, which I felt like I really needed in the past, this time I decided to kind of just like take a pause and just give myself a chance to really simmer on the idea and just see where I landed rather than feeling like I needed to have my next step already planned out.
Very cool. There's so much great stuff in what you just talked about there that I'd love to unpack little bits and pieces if that's okay with you. So, first and foremost, I think you started out by saying that you're kind of familiar with this idea of making moves, big leaps, taking a risk, jumping in, all of that, but it's new for a lot of women as part of the Great Resignation. And what you mentioned in there was that thread and kind of following curiosity breadcrumbs. How did you come about that as a strategy for you? Was that something you've always done, or was it just something you felt into?
Oh, that's a great question. And I've always sort of wondered about that too. I have really good friends who always felt like they were really destined to become like a specific thing. The best example is my closest childhood friend always knew she was going to be a novelist. And she is now, it's very incredible. And what was hard for me was I always felt like I was good at a lot of things, but didn't have like this specific passion or calling, like this thing that I just had to be. And for a long time, I really thought of that as kind of like a deficit, honestly. But as time has gone on, I've realized it's actually been a real asset to me. I've been able to try lots of different things. For the most part, I feel like I've been pretty successful. Sometimes so successful that I've ended up somewhere a little bit longer than I wanted to be because it felt like, oh, well, if you're good at this, you should keep doing this. We have that tendency. And it feels good to be good at something, right? So I think that for me, early on, I always sort of knew that there's a good chance I wasn't going to have like one calling that really kept my interest, but it took me a while to like embrace that that was not a bad thing, that I wasn't like missing something, but instead that like what I really like to do is to learn new things, get to know the different people that work on different things, be a part of different industries. And fortunately, with what I do now and what I really enjoy doing, it actually lends itself really well. Having a lot of experience in private law practice and nonprofit work. Like I've worked with really small nonprofits with like 3 people, and I've worked with really large international NGOs. At a think tank in DC, like being in all those different professional environments has really allowed me to have like a greater amount of empathy for the people I work with, the problems that they're trying to solve, the constraints that they're under, but also it allows me to kind of pull together the different threads from the things I like from different industries. And when I'm crafting, solutions or suggestions, or even just trying to relate to them as people. So yeah, it's something that I think I always had an inclination about, but it just took me a long time to think that was like actually okay.
Which that's so true. I love that so much. You're kind of like a little bit of a career chameleon, and that's not what we're ever taught should be the right route for us. It's always been modeled. You pick a career, you go to school for it, and then you spend your 40 years or whatever it is until you retire. There's not tons of great models of kind of the multi hyphenate aside from really show business, although I guess we're starting to see that more with career folks becoming entrepreneurs and then authors and speakers and all of that. But I love that for you, you've embraced that, and what you're now starting to see is that that is such a valuable strength that you're bringing to the table that others with less diverse experience don't have under their belt.
Yeah, I really feel like, I became a lawyer in part because, um, especially as kind of like an Asian, I think there were like a very limited number of career avenues that seemed like legitimate jobs for us. And I know that's like not true, but that's just like me and a lot of my friends have sort of like limited imagination in that way. And upon doing it, I was like, oh, this is actually a very versatile profession, a very versatile degree if you choose to see it that way. And I'm really glad I became a lawyer because it was really a great way of becoming a very good professional. Like the training I learned is just like general professional skills, how to show up, how to respond to people, kind of like I think the demeanor and the tone that I like to take with my clients now was all really important. But it is like this sense that, oh, when you do a thing, you're supposed to be that forever. And we don't get much of the you should follow your curiosity, or maybe at different times in your life, different things will be interesting to you or satisfying to you, and that it's worth it to pursue that. The other thing that I think that we don't talk about a lot is choosing careers that really fit the lifestyle you want to have. And I think that matters. That's how much you're going to like the job. That's how much you're going to really feel about whether or not it's a struggle, or if it just feels more natural to you. And I think that that was one thing that, again, over time, for a while I would consider these things to be like because I was unwilling to do X, Y, and Z. But then I realized it's just I wasn't thinking about those constraints in the way that they actually mattered, right? I felt like I should contort myself to fit into a certain career, as opposed to there are lots of careers out there or lots of things that you can do, and how the lifestyle you want and how you want to do work and who you want to work with are actually just as important as like the thing that you're doing.
Ah, you're speaking to my soul on that one. It's so, so true. And it's when we come to that realization that all of a sudden, kind of the walls and the box that we put ourselves into within our own minds, society too, but our own minds as well, and even saying what our limitations are. Once we come to that realization, that's when we can kind of cast off these shackles and start to really think about, what do I want? What could the next chapter look like? All that good stuff. Well, so to that end, when you talked about kind of the logical end of something and how you came to the decision each time to make that move, what was that experience like? Was it kind of an instant light bulb? Was it a gradual knowing? You mentioned maybe staying a little bit too long in some places. What was that like for you?
I think for me, it was always a gradual knowing. And honestly, I think the part that's a little more discouraging than anything sometimes is that I think that it's a gradual knowing that you sort of even have a sense from the very beginning. Like I think we go into a lot of things sort of having a sense like, ooh, this might not work long term or whatever, but we like want it to, not just because it's like easier to not have to change things, but also because, we want to be those people. We want to like persevere and just like, reach those different levels that oftentimes we're told are very important. And that once we get there, it'll all be worth it. And I think that for me, when I was thinking about becoming an academic, I really thought about each step along the way. Each step, I was like, well, if I don't really like this, I'm probably not going to like this other thing too. And so it was gradual, but it was like this kind of like a light bulb kind of like, dimming, but like instead getting brighter, right? Because it's like I always knew it and I was almost like allowing myself to accept it. And same thing with practicing law. I actually really enjoyed it at a certain point, but I also was like not allowing myself to not enjoy it during that point. I was like, I'm just going to work really hard. I'm going to do what I'm told, and I'm going to like take this wonderful opportunity and just be as good at this as I possibly can be. And that will be my focus. And then a couple of years in, I was like, I got to a point where I was like, okay, I feel like I'm doing a pretty good job. I'm getting good feedback. But if I'm going to keep doing this, I'm going to at some point have to start thinking about things beyond this job. And it was during that time that it was like, I was like, oh, this is hard, right? Like it's kind of like one or the other with that specific job. It's like, do I just really focus on this for X number of years and then hope I'm going to get to a point where I've like paid my dues and then I can think about my life more broadly? And I just realized there's never actually a good time for that. And if I want to be able to do both in a way that was kind of like honoring what I wanted, that it would just be hard. So it was very gradual, but I think we always have like that threshold moment too. And I can't tell you exactly what that moment was, but I did have a certain point where I was like, not only is this something that kind of like just the day-to-day lifestyle I don't want to sustain forever, but I also don't necessarily feel comfortable being in a profession that so focuses on like honing your expertise in one area. There are people that are kind of like much more multifaceted, but I just felt like that was not what I was going to do. I didn't have that broad level of curiosity within that specific discipline. Like for me, I needed to like get really excited about something completely new. So that was a little bit more of an aha moment, like, oh, I can't just sort of like do a variation of this. But it all kind of came together, and then I like kind of, plotted my exit.
Ah, makes sense. Somebody said to me the other day, if you're not enjoying the journey, you're not likely to enjoy the destination once you get there. And that really hit home to me. That's like the idea of paying your dues. You can kind of, at times slog through different phases and periods. But if you're looking ahead and the path is littered with so many of those, I'm not really sure if that's going to be what I want. It's a really good warning sign to listen to and to watch, because that light will dim over time. And then what you also made me think about is just like when we're kids and we have all these ideas of what we want to be when we grow up, like a marine biologist, dancer, singer, or, all these different things. And then the curiosity piece as we get older is kind of discouraged. Like once you're put into that career box of who you are within society, curiosity isn't as encouraged as a skill. And to your point, especially in law, where you're supposed to go deep, depth versus breadth, it can really hamper, I think, the skills that we can bring to organizations when we're just told we need to really focus going more deep than wide on certain things. So no, it makes a ton of sense. Thank you for sharing that. So for your story with going from being a lawyer and then making your move since then, when we chatted previously, you talked about how flexing that muscle has become a bit easier as you've gone along, and that making that choice really to leave the practice of law was the hardest for you. So maybe if you could talk a little bit about that, like how did that muscle memory build for you, and what was it like kind of breaking through, telling people you're leaving law, all of that good stuff?
It was very difficult. I had kind of like a lot of different narratives, I think, with different people in my lives and with myself, because I think at the time I was very insecure about the decision. It's something that you don't hear very often, especially if you sort of get a good job and you're doing pretty well. And it was like a weird time after the 2008, kind of like economic collapse. So people were really trying to get those types of jobs. So it seemed very strange to make this decision at this time. And again, I'd always had kind of like an academic and professional background prior to that, that kind of like it held together pretty well. It sounded like a pretty good story. It seemed like there was like this very steady progression. And one that I'd worked hard for and was proud of. But at a certain point, it was I had to like frame it to myself and to others in a way that made sense. And a lot of it was that I just really felt the need to do something different. And it's interesting because that was one of the hardest things I've ever done. And ever since then, I sort of realized, the people that care about me, like, they don't really care that much about what I'm doing. Like they care how I'm doing, but whether or not I'm sitting in an office, like writing contracts all day, that's not really that, concerning to them. And one thing I really believe is like, we really think that people are like overly concerned about our lives way more than people tend to be. Like everyone has stuff going on. They're trying to figure out their own lives. And so to let that fear that other people are going to like not understand or worry about you or anything keep you from making your own choices, I think it's very common. And at least it was very powerful for me. And it's something that I think it's really important to just kind of keep that perspective, right? Of like, who are these decisions for and who do they really impact on a certain level? And it's true that ever since then, every other change I've made, and I've actually made quite a few. I've been a consultant, and I've tried to create a work environment that working on technology and building software, it has a lot of change built into it. So I've tried to find a career now that really feeds that kind of like learning about new things, learning about new industries as part of my job. And I've also learned a lot about the kind of consultant I can be because of my desire to try new things. It's just gotten easier and easier because, first of all, I think now my narrative is that I'm just a person that will do different things at different times, and that's okay. And it seems to work out. Like I told a friend of mine, I was like, listen, like, it's not like we have the luxury to like not figure this out and, find what comes next. Like it will have to happen. We will do it. And I think most of us have the capacity to do so. So over time, it really has gotten a lot easier to the point that, yeah, it's like, it's actually a part of my identity is that I do different things that I think are interesting. And I think other people can agree with that oftentimes, not all the time, but sometimes. But also, even before that, it's kind of like, I always liken it to like meeting your romantic partner's parents for the first time. Like, no matter what, after that first time, it'll never be the first time again. It'll never be as hard as the first time. You'll never have the same anxiety or that internal struggle or like that insecurity. You might have other feelings and other insecurities, but that initial break, that initial change will never happen again. And so I'm glad I did it when I did it, that I did it early in my professional career, that I didn't wait a really long time. And I'm not saying that there's a time that it has to be done in, but I'm just saying I'm glad that I did it then because it has become easier subsequently. And I feel like what that allows for me to have is like more comfort that when change happens, oftentimes because of my own decision making, right, that I'll be able to meet that and that I'll find the next thing. I don't kind of like, I never wallow in a fear that like something else won't come up for me. I don't always know what it's going to be, and I wonder maybe like when is it going to happen, or like, again, will I ever find this thing that I'm like super passionate about that will keep my interest forever? But at the same time, I don't have like a huge amount of anxiety about it.
Well, you're building self-trust. That's what I hear in what you're saying, is that every time you make that move and it comes through, you're building kind of another block in the relationship of yourself that says, every time I come back to Jen and I make the decision that's right for her, it works out, because ultimately what I'm doing is I'm listening to what's best for me and I'm making the choice in that right direction. So that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, and I really think, the one thing that I feel like that I really feel that way now this time is the fact that I've been able to give myself a break prior to kind of refocusing what I'm working on and taking on new projects, because I think in the past, when new projects came to me, I would always feel like I needed to take them to kind of keep some consistency. But because I really felt like I wanted to be more thoughtful about like where I channel my energy, and take a break and really think about what that means and what that looks like for me, that was like a big, deal. And I'm hoping that for me, this first will not be the last, right? Like the next time I need another reset, I'll actually give myself the space to do that, as opposed to feeling like I need to have this like very clear linear narrative.
Totally. It's getting comfortable with that uncertainty and shifting from a scarcity mindset into a mindset that there's going to be abundant opportunities coming my way. And I can trust in that and allow myself the space to pause. And that also will help to further guide me in the direction that I'm going next, which I think is such an important takeaway from your story too, because when we don't give ourselves space and we're always kind of taught that we're supposed to continue working always, right? Career gaps on resumes are supposedly a big no-no, but if we don't give ourselves any space for that reflection and rest, we could potentially be missing out on opportunities that better connect with ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah.